the components, this time around I went with largely pre-owned parts. From in my mind, that was largely because for some things like basically the case or the radius, had already decided that I wanted to do a custom powder coating job on them, and that meant that I had the unique opportunity that I could basically buy pre-owned things, because even if the radiator or the case was scuffed up already and there were dings in the paint, it wouldn't matter anyway because I would get them media blasted anyway. And later on with the powder coat, you wouldn't see any of the original paint anyway. Um, at the same time, this was late last year, which meant that the memory pricing, both for system memory as well as NVMe drives, was very, very high, as well as the whole GPU market was still at the stage where if you, like I had decided beforehand, I wanted to have a 2080 Ti, and for a new 20 Ti, the least amount of money that you had to pay were about 1,100 euros. So I, when I came across a used 2080 Ti for 850 euros here, I basically immediately bought it because I knew that it was basically it was a slightly used card only. It was only a few month old, and it came with all the extras. So I alone with that single purchase already had 300 euros that I would have spent normally on new parts. So besides the GPU, I bought an Lian Li O11 dynamic case, the non-XL variant, because I wanted to have a case that was from the get-go designed to be used with water cooling, custom water cooling loops. I wanted to use hardlime again, and I wanted to have something that had enough space from to begin with. My last case was a Fractal Design Meshify C, which started out as a purely air-cooled case, and then later on evolved into my first custom loop with hardline that basically, or hard tubing that basically meant that I had to cram everything in a very, very small case. And for somebody like me that has kind of chubby fingers, it became quite a hassle basically later on to tighten all the fittings and get below all the different components and to fit everything in there. And I had to basically use a Dremel to make things fit that weren't supposed to fit. So I wanted to have something that was more or less the equivalent of for a car where you would use bolt-ons. So designed for water cooling, that had a lot of different options already available. For instance, the distribution plates, whether it be by a manufacturer like EK or I think Barrow makes another one. I wanted to have a distribution plate. I ended up using the EK one because it has a pump already pre-installed. All the basic routings for the water for the tubes were at the correct height, and from that on, I found a mainboard shortly afterwards. There was an ASUS Crosshair 8 formula. I wanted to have a formula because I wanted to have something that has a water cooled VRM block. That even though I knew already at that point that it was a bit of an overkill. My previous build had a water cooled mainboard as well, and I wanted to have that as a bit of a continuation from the last build. That's also one of the first things that I found out pretty quickly. That if you want to run the custom water cooling block on the board, you either had to use very fancy waterline tubing, but I wanted to basically have it as minimalistic and without much complex shapes in the tubings. So I ended up very fastly finding out that the only way that you could put this all together was to route the tubing into the CPU block, and from the CPU block next to the main board, which this connection sits at a slight angle, and it looks a little bit canted, and that's one thing. Everything else in the case is very level and very rectangular, and then you see this one canted piece, and it's to this day it always catches my eye when I look at the case, and I think like, if I perhaps one day I will find something where I can perhaps change that out to have something else and not this canted piece. For the CPU, I went with a new AMD 3950X. I wanted to have something with that had a lot of threads, because I wanted to use this whole machine for VR, and basically try to stream a VR over a custom third-person camera setup, to use it as in conjunction with Twitch. And I thought, okay, the additional threads in this CPU give me the ability to transcode the video streams in the background while I still have more than enough horsepower to game on it, and not have stuttering uh, or similar things, basically. The GPU was a 2080 Ti from MSI, which I stumbled upon and immediately bought. Basically, the RAM was G-Skill Trident Neo. The 3200 speeds or megahertz with a latency of 14. I at that time had read a lot of articles that claimed that actually the timings were more important than the memory speed. Since then, I've educated myself a little bit further and read a lot about that the 3600 is basically the perfect speed, because it's the same as the Infinity Fabric inside the CPU. But I haven't dove fully into the overclocking potential of my RAM yet, and I'm thinking that if I try to tighten up the timings a little bit more, and try to the different timings, different speeds, that I perhaps can get a little bit more of performance out of this setup than I already have now. For the SSDs, I basically went with I wanted to initially to go with a small SSD that was very fast, a Samsung, but only a 250 gigs, because I wanted to use that as my main system drive, where my Windows partition would be on and all my basic programs would run on. And then I wanted to have a larger but slower SSD. I was looking into the Intel 660p series, because I used them before in the 1 terabyte variant, and I wanted to buy a 2 terabyte variant of that, because I found out very quickly with my old PC that even a 1 terabyte SSD in today's games economy and in the age of 200 gigabyte Call of Duty download, or or Microsoft Flight Simulator, that you can't have enough space, and even 1 terabyte is filled up very quickly if you install certain games on it. So I wanted to have a 2 terabyte one. I basically first took a look at the Intel things, but I found an used WD Black Series 2 terabyte NVMe on eBay, which was quite new still as well, and I bought that for I think €100 less than it would cost me retail. So I now have a very fast Steam library SSD as well. For the PSU, I went with an Asus Thor 850 watts, because I wanted to, I read that they are basically rebadged Seasonic Platinum series, and it comes with a lot of kit. It looked very nice. Yes, I have to admit that probably the display on the side of the PSU might have influenced me a little bit there as well. And but overall, I can't say that I'm disappointed with it. It's a very nice PSU, and it came with a lot of extras. Even the cables are for manufacturing standard cables. They are very, very nice. They come with their own cable combs, but I will probably later still change my cables around to a custom set by Cable Mods to get something like their pro cables with the aluminum cable combs. Yeah. For the radiators, I went with a pair of used EK SE 360 rats because I wanted to have the old version where you could disassemble them into their shroud and their radiator cores, basically. Because I knew I wanted to have them media blasted and I wanted to have the shrouds at least powder coated in a special color, which ties in with the whole rest of the build because I wanted to build this in a similar color scheme than my old computer clan used. Because when I was younger, those people that I met in that time of my life around me, they really kept me interested or made me more interested in computers and building my computers and learning more about my computers. And I thought it would be a neat feature to basically use our old computer clan color scheme to build the whole computer now. I discovered two of this 360 rats basically on, I think one was on Facebook, one was on eBay, and later on I found another one on Facebook that I bought as well. Basically, when I contacted the seller, he said he had two. Without further asking, I said okay. He wanted to have $95 for them. I thought, okay, that's quite a decent price for two of them. But when they arrived, I actually found out they were not 360 rats. They actually were 480 rats. So now I have 480 XE rats, these real thick things lying around. I had to do quite a bit of touch up there, but I have them now fully painted, and they're lying in my storage here to wait for my next project. I only have to find now a case that fits two 480 rats. But at that point, you're really you only have quite literally a handful of different cases that you can use. Yeah, that was basically it for the components. All the water cooling components this time around, I bought again from EK. I had very good experience with my old build with EK things, and they just released shortly prior to this build the torque fittings, and which I absolutely love. They later on had an interesting thing that while they already had released all the fittings on the angled fittings, the like 45 degrees or something, only came out, I think, in April of 2020, so this year. So I needed to combine some of the old fittings with the newer or the old angular adapters with the new fittings, which sometimes looks a bit funky, but I think overall I pulled off quite a nice mix, and you won't really notice them if you look at the footage. So that was the components part. Next up, we'll talk a little bit about the different modding things that I did.